Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My lecture today is about the ventricular system of the brain. Well, this picture show you this is the simple picture of the brain, showing this is the cerebrum and this is cerebellum, and this is the pons and medulla oblongata, and above the pons you have the midbrain, of course. And this colored area will show you simply this ventricular system. This actually like cavities or lumens within the brain tissue. And this system is composed of many cavities, many ventricles, actually four ventricles. One on the first one is the lateral ventricle, and this lateral ventricles, each hemisphere has one lateral ventricle, and all this is the lateral ventricle. This is the lateral ventricles. Of course, and this is on the left side, and this is on the right side. And also we have another cavity, other ventricle here, which is the third ventricle. And here we have the fourth one, which is the fourth ventricle. The ventricular system is a set of four interconnected cavities. They are connected to each other through special foramen. These cavities connected to each other. Within each ventricle is a region of choroid plexus. The choroid plexus actually is a specialized tissue which is responsible for the production of the CSF. So the CSF, these ventricles containing this choroid plexus, and which is responsible for the production of the CSF, which circulates here within the ventricular system, and later on it will also go out from this system to circulate in the subarachnoid space surrounding the brain tissue, all the structures of the brain. The ventricular system is continuous with the central canal of the spinal cord. You know, the spinal cord has within its center, we have a canal within the spinal cord. So this ventricular system is continuous with this central canal. You see, this is the starting point of spinal cord. This is spinal cord, and here we have the central canal within the spinal cord. So this system is continuous with the central canal of the spinal cord. So through the lower part of the fourth ventricle, and so it allows the flow of CSF within the canal, and it will circulate deep to the spinal cord, and then it leaves the spinal cord through special foramen to surround to go to the subarachnoid space and then surround the spinal cord. And also, of course, here will also leave the CSF will leave from the fourth ventricle through special foramina to go to the subarachnoid space that surround the brain tissue. The four ventricles of the brain, what are these four ventricles of the brain? We have two lateral ventricles, one on the right hemisphere, one on the left hemisphere. Second, we have the third ventricle, and third, we have the fourth ventricle. And also we have a small, another ventricle at the end of the central canal within the spinal cord. And of course, this will be discussed later on when we give you a lecture about the spinal cord. Here we have this picture showing the brain, and this is the cerebrum, and this is the cerebellum, and of course this is the corpus callosum that connect with the two hemispheres, the right and left. And also we have the midbrain and the pons and the medulla oblongata, and here the start of the spinal cord, and of course is the foramen magnum. Here we have the lateral ventricle. Here we have the third ventricle between the two thalami. This is the thalamus, and this is the hypothalamus. And attached to the hypothalamus is the stalk of pituitary gland, and this is the pituitary gland within the cella torsica, which is part of the sphenoid bone. And of course, this is the fourth ventricle. So the lateral, two, one right and one left, the third ventricle and the fourth ventricle. The four ventricles are connected to each other by or through multiple foramina. And these foramina are, first of all, we have the interventricular foramina, or what's called the foramen of Monro. And this foramen of Monro is present in each lateral ventricle and connects the lateral ventricles to the third ventricle. So we have two foramen of Monro, one in each lower part of the lateral ventricle and lead to the third ventricle. So one from the right and one from the left lateral to the third ventricle. The second opening or second foramina is the cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct of Sylvius. And this duct will connect the third ventricle with the fourth ventricle, as we will see in the next picture. The other foramen is the foramen of Magendie. Foramen of Magendie or Magendie connects the fourth ventricle with the central canal of the spinal cord. As we said that the fourth ventricle is continue or it has a continuation with the central canal of the spinal cord. The spinal cord contains a central canal along the spinal cord. So between the fourth ventricle and the central canal, there's an opening of foramina, and this foramina is called foramen of Magendie. The other foramen is foramina of Loschka. Foramina of Loschka. And this foramen of Loschka is on each side of the fourth ventricle, connects it to the subarachnoid space around the brain and spinal cord. You see, this picture will show you the size of this foramina and this opening. Actually, between this is the lateral ventricle and this is the third ventricle. Here we have an opening, and foramina is called the interventricular foramina of Monro. This is foramen of Monro that connects the lateral to the third ventricle. And between the third ventricle and the fourth ventricle, we have the cerebral aqueduct. Cerebral aqueduct. And this will, the CSF will pass from the third to the fourth ventricle through this cerebral aqueduct. And here, this is the fourth ventricle. The fourth ventricle contains three openings. One opening below it connects the fourth ventricle to the central canal of spinal cord, and the other opening on each side, one on the right, one on the left. This is called, of course, that one is called the foramen of Magendie that connect to the central canal of the spinal cord, and the the foramina on each side, one on the right, one on the left, is called foramen of Loschka. Foramen of Loschka, which is also called lateral aperture. Lateral aperture. This foramen, it leads to the subarachnoid space. This is the subarachnoid space. So the CSF that produced in the lateral and in the third ventricle and in the fourth ventricle will pass to the central canal of the spinal cord and also will pass through this foramen of Loschka to the subarachnoid space. So this is the subarachnoid space. You see these arrows will give you the direction of the CSF. It is produced from choroid plexus. This is the choroid plexus and this is the choroid plexus. And it goes to the cavity, it goes to the ventricles, and it passes through this cerebral aqueduct and then to the fourth ventricle, and from the fourth ventricle through this foramen of Loschka, it will goes outside to the subarachnoid space, and this is the subarachnoid space. You see, it surrounds the brain, all the cerebellum, all these structures are surrounded by subarachnoid space, and within this subarachnoid space the CSF will pass. And also here we have from the this is the arachnoid. Of course, this is the arachnoid. It's not clear here, but from this arachnoid matter there is a special granulation or special structures which is called arachnoid granulations. Here, of course, the this granulation projects within the superior sagittal sinus, This is the saphenous sinus containing venous blood, dural venous sinus containing venous blood. These projections from the arachnoid matter are called arachnoid granulations, and through this granulation, the CSF would be filtered, and as it runs around the brain tissue or the cerebrum, through this arachnoid filtration granulation, the CSF will be filtered, and the uh, unwanted products within the CSF, within the cerebrospinal fluid, will leave to the superior sinus, and then it will go to the venous blood, and then lastly to goes to the heart. Now we talk about each ventricle, very short notes about each ventricles. Actually, each ventricles, before we start discussing or talking about the ventricles, each ventricles actually has a boundaries. Superior boundaries, inferior boundaries, posterior, anterior, floor, roof. All these boundaries, we will not talk about it in details. And inshallah, in the future, we talk about these boundaries in details if our times allowed. So the lateral ventricle, these are two irregular cavities lying within each cerebral hemisphere. It is roughly a C-shaped and consists of a central part or body and three horns, anterior, posterior, and inferior. So each extending to frontal, occipital, and temporal lobes respectively. So this is this color area, red color area. This is the third ventricle. You see how it is extended. Of course, these are two. This is the boundary of one. This is to the left side, and that the right side. You see, and extension of the right side and extension of the left side. So this area is called the central part. All this is the lateral ventricle. All this is the lateral ventricle. This area from here to here is called the central part of the lateral ventricle, and is within the parietal lobe of brain. And the here anterior part, which is called the anterior or frontal horn, anterior or frontal horn, because it is in the frontal lobe of the cerebrum of the brain. And here we have the posterior horn, which is also called occipital horn because it is within the occipital lobe of the brain. And of course, here the inferior horn is within the temporal lobe, within the temporal lobe of the brain. So the largest ventricle of the ventricular system is the lateral ventricle, and this lateral ventricle composed of a central part which is called the body, which is within the parietal bone, and the frontal or anterior horn, and the posterior occipital horn, and the inferior temporal horn. So this is the lateral ventricle. Each lateral ventricle communicates with the third ventricle through interventricular foramen of Monro, as we said. The lateral ventricle contains a choroid plexus, which is composed of highly vascular pia mater in two layers lined with ependymal cells. It is situated between fornix superiorly and thalamus inferiorly. Its function is the production of CSF. So this choroid plexus actually is present in all ventricles. Here we gave you its definition, and as we said, it is a specialized and highly vascular layer from the pia mater, And this also, as we said, is lined by the ependymal cells. And ependyma, what we mean by ependyma? Ependyma is a thin neuroepithelial lining of the ventricular system of the brain and the central canal of the spinal cord. The ependyma is one of the four types of neurogyria. You know the neurogyria, المادة الدبقية, also it's called المادة الدبقية. Neurogyria are four types. One of them is the ependyma. This is a neuroepithelial. And ependyma is one of the four types of neurogyria in the central nervous system. It is involved in the production of cerebrospinal fluid and is shown to serve as a reservoir for neuroregeneration. Also for neuroregeneration. The third ventricle. The third ventricle is a slit-like cleft between the two thalami, the right thalamus and left. This very slit-like cleft lie between the two thalami is the third ventricle. It communicates anteriorly with lateral ventricles through interventricular foramen of Monro, and it communicates posteriorly with the fourth ventricle through the cerebral aqueduct of Sylvius, as we said previously. Here, this picture show you all this. We talk about it. This is the choroid plexus within the lateral and the third ventricle, and this foramen of Monro between the lateral ventricle and the third ventricle. And of course, this is the cerebral aqueduct that pass the CSF will pass from the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle through this aqueduct or Sylvius or cerebral aqueduct. And of course, you see all these arrows will show you the direction of CSF, where it is produced from here and then passes through the foramen and then pass to the fourth, and then from the foramen of Loschka will goes to the subarachnoid space, and this is the subarachnoid space. You see, this is the subarachnoid space, and will surround all the brain tissue. And of course, these are the arachnoid granulation, or also it's called arachnoid villi. Also, it's called arachnoid villi or arachnoid granulations. And as we said, this for filtration of the CSF, and unwanted materials will go to the venous sinus, the superior sinus. Okay, yes. The fourth ventricle is a tent-shaped cavity. يشبه الخيمة. It is situated anterior to the cerebellum and posterior to the pons and upper half of the medulla oblongata. It is lined with ependyma. All the ventricles lined by ependyma. It is connected above with cerebral aqueduct to the third ventricle, of course, and below with the central canal of the medulla oblongata and spinal cord, the foramen of Magendie. You see, this picture also will show you just repetition actually of the position of the sinuses, of the ventricles and the foramina, and one attached to it. This is lateral, and this is the third ventricle, and this is the cerebral aqueduct, and this is the position of the fourth ventricle between the cerebellum and the pons and upper part of the medulla oblongata. And of course, here the fourth ventricle connect to the central canal of the medulla and then central canal of the spinal cord. The medulla contains also central canal, and it's connect to the central canal of the spinal cord. Now we talk about few points about the cerebrospinal fluid. The cerebrospinal fluid is produced within the ventricles of the brain by the choroid plexus. It is a clear, colorless fluid, and its volume is about 150 ml. It possesses inorganic salts like plasma, for example, sodium potassium chloride, also contain glucose, which is equal to the half of the blood level, and traces of protein كميات قليلة جدا من البروتين and few lymphocytes. What is the function? What are the functions of the cerebrospinal fluid? The function of the spinal fluid include, first of all, it paths the external and internal surfaces of the brain and spinal cord. Second, it serves as cushion between the central nervous system and surrounding bones, thus protects against mechanical trauma. Any external trauma to the head, this cerebrospinal fluid will absorb the strength of the trauma. Actually, we said about mild to moderate trauma, not severe trauma, of course, the mild or moderate trauma. So this is in addition to the meninges, which is in addition to the meninges, also it gives protection to the brain and other structures within the cranium. Third, it provides buoyancy, and fourth, nourishment of nervous system, and fifth, removes the products of neuronal metabolism. So it gives all these are functions of cerebrospinal fluid. And also this picture will show you another picture how the cerebrospinal fluid circulate within the cranial cavity. Thank you very much for your listening.